You are tired, aren't you? Tired of chasing a happiness that never arrives. You wake up and feel an emptiness. You go to sleep and it's still there. And the most ironic thing is that the more you try to get rid of this weight, the more you force a smile, the more you repeat those positive phrases you read on the internet, the deeper you sink. And maybe no one tells you this clearly, but Dostoevsky did. And he knew. He knew that this modern obsession with being happy is a disease disguised as a solution. He wrote, "Man only likes to recount his misfortunes. Happiness does not enter into his calculations. Because true happiness is not pursued like a prize. It happens when you stop running away from pain." And that's where most people fail. Because you were taught to avoid suffering at all costs, to numb your anguish with distractions, with empty promises, with unattainable goals. But Dostoevsky was not afraid of pain. He dove into it. He looked into the eyes of human misery, madness, despair, and found there meaning. Yes, meaning. Because suffering, contrary to what you've been told, can be the beginning of a transformation. But for that, you need to stop, breathe, and face the uncomfortable truth. Maybe you are suffering not because something is wrong with you, but because you are trying to live a lie. The lie that life has to be light, positive, fulfilling all the time. Dostoevsky wrote, "Suffering is the only source of consciousness." And maybe that's why you are here now, watching this video. Because something inside you already knows there is a farce in this race for happiness. I am not here to console you. I am here to confront you. Like an old psychologist who has seen this same cycle repeat in thousands of souls, people trying to look fine when everything inside them is collapsing. And you? How long will you keep up this facade? How long will you try to heal real pain with superficial solutions? In this video, you will understand why Dostoevsky believed that the more you try to be happy, the more you suffer. And perhaps, for the first time, you will be able to accept your pain not as a mistake, but as a portal. Shall we enter? Today, being happy has become an obligation. It's everywhere. In advertisements on social media, in motivational speeches, as if life should be an endless sequence of perfect moments, spontaneous laughter, constant achievements, and forced gratitude, sadness, doubt, fatigue. All of this has become synonymous with personal failure. If you are sad, it's because you don't know how to live properly. If you are anxious, it's because you're not vibrating at the right frequency. This is the tyranny of modern happiness. It does not liberate. It oppresses. Dostoevsky saw this before anyone else. In his novels, he exposes what happens when humans try to shape their existence around artificial ideals. In Notes from Underground, he talks about the man who rejects any system that forces him to be rationally happy. He denounces the trap of a world where pain is seen as a defect and not as an essential part of the human soul. Man likes to build, but he also likes to destroy. Why? Because he has will, because he is free. This sentence reveals something disturbing. Perhaps what destroys us is not suffering itself, but the denial of it. Look at how we live today. We have created a world where everything must be beautiful, efficient, and positive. Social media are showcases where no one suffers, where everyone has purpose, a healthy routine, unshakable self-esteem. But this is just a mask, because when night falls and silence settles in, you feel. And Dostoevsky knew exactly what this silence is. He called it the inner abyss. And it is this abyss that plastic happiness tries to cover up with ready-made phrases. The problem is that human beings were not born to live anesthetized. When you try to remain constantly happy, you are violating your own nature. You are amputating fundamental parts of your psyche, your sadness, your anger, your loneliness, your existential doubt. And what remains is not a light life, but a superficial one, without depth, without truth, without soul. The compulsory happiness of modernity is like the crystal palace that Dostoevsky criticizes, a cold, sterile utopia where there is no room for the irrational, for mistakes, for redemptive pain. But he knew that the human soul is chaotic, unpredictable, contradictory, and that trying to standardize it in the name of an ideal of happiness is to kill the spirit from within. And perhaps that is why, despite living in the 19th century, Dostoevsky sees our time more clearly than many contemporary thinkers. Because he was not afraid to say that the pursuit of happiness can be a symptom of despair, that there is more truth in a cry of anguish than in a forced smile. But then, if we should not live for happiness, what is the role of suffering in human existence? And why did Dostoevsky see it as a form of revelation? This is what we will explore now. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. For Dostoevsky, suffering is not a punishment. It is a language, a force that reveals who we really are when all the masks fall away. He did not see pain as an accident to be avoided, but as a deep necessity of the human soul. In his novels, there are no truly transformed characters who have not gone through inner hell. There is no redemption without a fall, no truth without anguish. And this is precisely what our contemporary culture refuses to accept, that suffering can be sacred. Take Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment as an example. A man who tries to justify a murder in the name of a rational idea of moral superiority. He believes he can transcend moral laws, that he is above good and evil. But it is suffering, and only suffering, that slowly reconnects him with his humanity. Guilt corrodes him, fever devours him, and delirium confronts him. And it is only in this state of ruin that he begins to see something truer, more alive, more human. Suffering and pain are always mandatory for a broad consciousness and a deep heart. Dostoevsky leaves no doubt. Those who feel deeply live fully. In modernity, suffering is pathologized. Sadness is diagnosed as a chemical failure, anguish as dysfunction. And of course, there are clinical contexts that require care. But Dostoevsky warns us of the danger of dehumanizing pain, of trying to silence the soul with pills, formulas, and ready-made phrases. Because suffering, despite being cruel, can be the only moment of truth in a lifetime of self-deception. It is when you lose everything, status, certainties, even hope, that something in you finally awakens. It is pain that wounds, but it is also pain that reveals. In The Brothers Karamazov, Ivan, the tormented intellectual, rejects the world because he cannot accept the suffering of children. He is at war with God, with existence, with morality. But this revolt is not superficial. It is an expression of a spirit that does not conform to the cruelty of reality. His suffering is an existential cry, and Dostoevsky does not ridicule him. On the contrary, he respects him. Because there is a nobility in suffering deeply for something that matters. To suffer, for Dostoevsky, is to love enough to despair. And perhaps you are going through something like this. Perhaps your pain is not a mistake, but a sign that there is still something alive in you. Something that refuses the lie, that is not satisfied with disposable pleasures, that cries out for a greater truth. Suffering is not your enemy. The true enemy is the desperate attempt to silence it. But there is a specific type of suffering that Dostoevsky denounces with fury, that which arises from self-deception, from the attempt to build an artificial happiness based on the lies we tell ourselves. This is what we will talk about in the next part, the illusion of manufactured happiness and the pain it inevitably generates. Dostoevsky understood like few the abyss between what a human being desires and what they can bear to face. He knew that a person lies to themselves with a terrifying ease, especially when it comes to their own happiness. And that is where the danger lies, because there is no greater suffering than that which arises from an inner lie, from a desperate attempt to appear well while everything inside you is crumbling. In Notes from Underground, its protagonist, a lonely, bitter, corrosive man, denounces the absurdity of reason as the absolute guide of life. He mocks the idea that if a human being knows what is good for them, they will always choose the best path. No. For Dostoevsky, man is unpredictable, contradictory, self-destructive. And, precisely for that reason, the attempt to turn life into an equation of pleasure and reward, as promised by modern society, is an insult to the complexity of the soul. Man likes to live his own life. He does not want to live a pre-fabricated life. This is what we read there, like a cry of revolt against ready-made and pasteurized models of happiness. You have already noticed this, even if you cannot explain it. That emptiness you feel when following all the rules, taking care of your appearance, keeping your feed beautiful, working hard, saying that everything is fine. Even after doing everything right, something still feels missing. That sensation of playing a role, smiling at the mirror but with a silent chest. It is what Dostoevsky would call artificial happiness, a theater set up to hide the fear we have of facing pain head-on. And the worst part, society rewards this theater. You gain likes, compliments, promotions. But deep down, you are paying a high price, the price of distancing yourself from your own truth. Because when you choose to believe in the illusion of constant happiness, you begin to silence your legitimate anguish, your sincere restlessness, your search for real meaning. And this generates a much more dangerous type of suffering, the denied, buried, encapsulated suffering. The pain that cannot be expressed because it does not fit the image you need to maintain. Dostoevsky saw this kind of falseness as a form of self-annihilation. In his characters, whenever someone tries to force an idea of happiness, they end up plunging into despair. It's as if he were shouting, "Do you want to be happy? Then stop lying to yourself. Stop pretending you don't feel. Stop trying to be what they said you should be." And here is the key. The more you try to maintain this image, the further you get from your own essence. And that is what begins to make you sick. The distance between who you are and who you are trying to be. Behind every forced smile lies a muffled scream. Behind every frantic search for pleasure, there is a desperate attempt to silence the emptiness. But Dostoevsky offers a way out, one that does not involve empty promises or magic formulas. He shows us that pain has a purpose, that when you stop running away and start listening to what your anguish is trying to say, something changes, something awakens. And perhaps this awakening has much more to do with freedom than with happiness. And that is exactly what we will talk about next. Why Dostoevsky saw suffering as a path to true freedom, and how you can begin to liberate yourself not by being happy, but by being honest with your pain. Dostoevsky believed in an idea that is as powerful as it is uncomfortable. The true human being only begins to exist when they accept pain as an inseparable part of their freedom. And this goes against everything you have been taught. From an early age, you were conditioned to think that freedom means doing whatever you want, feeling whatever is most comfortable, choosing the most pleasurable path. But Dostoevsky turns this logic upside down. For him, real freedom begins when you stop fleeing from pain and start consciously choosing what you are willing to face for something that has meaning. Take the case of Sonia in Crime and Punishment, a young woman who, in the face of misery and degradation, chooses prostitution to support her family. But she is not portrayed as a passive victim. On the contrary, she is perhaps the strongest example of existential freedom in all of Dostoevsky's work, because she carries suffering with dignity. Because she does not deny reality, she faces it head-on, without illusions. And it is this capacity to love even in pain, to maintain faith even in despair, that makes her free. Much freer than the men who live surrounded by comfort, but are trapped in their internal lies. This is where the paradox comes in. The more you try to avoid suffering, the more of a slave you become. A slave to your image, to the expectations of others, to your desperate need for approval, for relief, for control. But when you confront pain and say, "Yes, I accept. I choose to go through this," something changes. You take command. You reclaim the control that you previously surrendered to every external stimulus. And this is the freedom that Dostoevsky revered, not the childish freedom to do what one wants, but the mature freedom to choose what one needs. In The Possessed, he writes, "Suffering is a great thing. It should not be erased, for it is consciousness." For him, pain is the battlefield where the soul proves itself, where the superficial self dies and the deep self is born. And that is frightening, of course, because it hurts, because it demands that you stop hiding behind excuses. But it is also where rebirth resides, because when you face your pain with open eyes, it stops dominating you. You are no longer a victim of your feelings. You are someone who suffers, but who chooses what to do with that suffering. Freedom, then, is not the absence of pain. It is the conscious decision to go through it for something that matters. Freedom is not instant happiness. It is depth. It is truth. It is the end of illusions and the beginning of an authentic existence, even if it costs everything you thought you needed to be happy. But then the inevitable question arises: why do we insist so much on this pursuit? Why, even in the face of all this, do we continue trying at all costs to be happy? Why is it so difficult to simply stop and accept what is? This is what we will explore next: the blind impulse for happiness and the question you may have never had the courage to ask: what if you stopped trying to be happy? This is the question that no one wants to hear, because it exposes the wound that everyone tries to hide. Why, even after so much pain, so much emptiness, so much frustration, do you still insist on chasing a happiness that never arrives? What exactly do you expect to find at the end of this road? Relief? Meaning? Redemption? Dostoevsky would look you in the eyes right now, with that merciless calm of someone who knows the depths of the abyss, and say, "You are looking in the wrong place. You want to be happy." But do you know what that means? Or are you just repeating the script that was taught to you? The script that says you need to have a perfect body, a brilliant career, an enviable love life, and a positive mind to be a complete person. The problem is that this script was not written by your soul. It was imposed. And you, without realizing it, are living as if you were a character in an empty play. A play that slowly consumes you, but that you continue to perform because you think there is no alternative. Dostoevsky knew that modern man would become a slave to this pursuit. In The Eternal Husband, he portrays characters who drown in self-deception, desperately trying to fill an internal void with external ideas of achievement. It is a portrait of the human being who has already lost connection with their own essence, but continues to act as if there is still something to conquer. Lying is the only possible way of life for certain people, he writes. And perhaps this is one of the harshest phrases you can hear today, because it forces you to look within and ask, am I seeking happiness or just trying to escape from myself? You think you are seeking peace, but you are trying to avoid silence. You think you want love, but you are just fleeing from loneliness. You say you want to feel alive, but you are merely trying to distract yourself from the symbolic death you live every day. This is the trap. You seek happiness, not because you are ready to live it, but because you are afraid of what you will find if you stop running. What if you simply stopped? Stopped pretending, stopped chasing, stopped trying to fix yourself all the time? What would remain? Perhaps an emptiness? Perhaps a silence you have never faced? Perhaps a pain that has been hidden since childhood? But Dostoevsky believed that it is in that moment, when you shed all masks and face existence naked, that something true finally happens. Maybe you are on the brink of that now. Perhaps everything you have lived until now has brought you to this point, the exhaustion of trying to be happy. And if that is the case, then there is hope. Because from here, the search changes. The question shifts from how can I be happy to how can I live sincerely, even if it hurts? And that is exactly the key to the last part of our journey. Understanding that true peace, that which does not depend on applause, achievements, or external stimuli, is not in the happiness that was sold to you. It is in something much deeper, quieter, and more transformative. It is in the acceptance of pain as part of life. Let's close this cycle by talking about that, because now you are ready. We have reached a point that few can attain, the place where truth finally reveals itself. And it does not come with lights, nor with certainties, nor with euphoria. It comes in silence. In that moment, when you stop resisting, when at last you surrender, and understand that life is not meant to be dominated, optimized, or conquered. It is meant to be felt, with all its intensity, with all its pain, with all its tragic beauty. Dostoevsky understood this like no one else. He did not write to please. He wrote to confront. And if his books remain alive to this day, it is because they say what no one has the courage to say out loud, that suffering is inevitable, and that fleeing from it only deepens the whole. Embrace suffering and gain freedom. That was the cry echoing behind his most tormented characters. The freedom that comes not from the absence of pain, but from reconciliation with it. True peace, and here I am not talking about momentary relief, but about real, firm, solid peace, is not found at the end of pain. It is in the full acceptance that it is part of you. When you stop fighting against what you feel and start listening to what your pain is trying to say, it changes form. It ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a guide. It stops being a burden. It becomes a portal. Dostoevsky saw this even in the most brutal experiences. In The Idiot, Prince Mishkin is the symbol of purity thrown into a sick world, and yet he carries his pain with a serenity that disturbs everyone around him. Not because he does not suffer, but because he does not flee, because he accepts, because he sees beyond. The true, strong soul, according to Dostoevsky, is not the one that does not feel, but the one that refuses to betray what it feels in the name of a false peace. And perhaps this is what you need right now, not a new answer, but a new kind of courage. The courage to look at your pain and say, I see you, and I will no longer run from you. Because when you do that, when you abandon the illusion of constant happiness and embrace reality as it is, a new space opens up within you, a space of truth, of presence, of peace. If this message has touched you in some way, comment below, I stopped running. Say it out loud, write it down, record it, because perhaps this is the most important decision of your life so far. And if you know someone who is still trying to force a smile while bleeding inside, share this video with that person. You could be the spark of their turnaround. And before you go, don't forget, the next video continues this journey. It is important. And if you've made it this far, you need to keep going, because transformation does not happen all at once. It happens step by step, and the next step starts now.